Hi, Martin here. Thank you for joining me for this week's beginners project video. I hope you're all well and you have been turning lots and lots in your workshops. Now, I've not posted a beginners project video for a few weeks, so I do apologise for that. And many people have asked me if I can do a bowl turning video, which is what I'm doing today. And we're going to look at a 6x2 inch bowl like this, a little piece of sycamore. 10mm walls, which isn't too thick and it's not too thin for a beginner's piece. And if you have a look, they don't look out of place. And there's a nice curve in the bottom, and there's a nice curve on the outside of the piece as well. And in the video, I'll explain roughly how I do create the nice curves and stuff like that. We'll also look at finishing with a bowl sander. An oil finish as well as a wax finish too. And what you'll need for this, you'll need a chuck with your standard jaws, a bowl gouge, diamond tip parting tool and an optional skew chisel. But you'll also need other things that you've probably already got, like a live centre, a pencil and hopefully a centre finder too. So I'm not going to waffle on for ages. I'm going to get on with the video. Thanks for watching. Please do like, share and subscribe, and if you feel so inclined then please do leave a comment below and I'll get back to you. But for now, here is how you can turn your very first bowl out of a 6x2 inch piece of sycamore. Thanks very much. See you in a sec. So to start with, I would suggest that you use a fairly small blank like this 6-inch blank of sycamore, and also a softer wood, something like sycamore or cherry as your first bowl, and as plain as possible without knots or anything like that, as it will make your first bowl a much easier and a much more enjoyable turn. Now, before we get going with turning the bowl, we obviously need to find the centre. So I'm going to use a centre finder like this one, very inexpensive, and you'll see on one side there's a 90-degree ridge which you can use to place up against the side of the bowl like that, and then you can take a pencil and just start marking lines across the centre. Now thankfully this blank is already pretty round, so the centre mark there is quite obvious. Now we're going to turn this bowl on a worm screw. The worm screw here fits into the Sorby Patriot chuck. There are lots of different types of worm screw out there, and they're good for things up to 11-12 inches, something like that. Other people may think otherwise, but I'm very comfortable turning 11-12 inch pieces on a worm screw before I move up to a faceplate. Next, what you need to do is drill a hole to the depth of the worm screw using a drill bit that is a couple of millimeters smaller than the diameter of the worm screw. And you can use a piece of tape on your drill bit as a depth gauge, and then drill the hole. And with the hole drilled and your worm screw in the chuck, you can wind the blank onto the worm screw, and if you've got a spindle lock, it's very helpful to use it at this point. There. And for a little bit of added support, you can bring the tailstock up as well. Then bringing your tool rest in, make sure it's nice and square to the bed, nice and close to the piece. Give it a spin to make sure none of the blank hits the tool rest. Put on some protection, grab your nicely sharpened bowl gouge, get the lathe spinning to a decent speed. If the lathe starts to wobble like it is now, drop the speed back down until the lathe runs smoothly without any vibration, and then put the gouge onto the tool rest with the bevel pointing in the direction that you want to go, and start to take little cuts, and the handle is quite low down. And then gently and steadily take little cuts until the blank turns round. Then the more round it gets, the faster you can turn the lathe. And then if you rest the tool on top of the piece and it runs smoothly, then you know the blank is round and you don't have to stop the lathe. And it's not quite there yet. So one more pass. And there is a nice round blank. Next, we can remove the tailstock. Now this step, we've got the tool rest across the face of the piece, or what will be the bottom of the piece, and we need to plane that off or face off the bottom of the blank in order to make our recess for the chuck when we turn it round. So same again, the lathe's running fairly quickly because it's nice and round and balanced. Tool handle quite low down, resting against your upper thigh or your hip. The tool rest, as you can see, is quite far below the centre line, so you can bring the tool, the cutting edge of the tool, up to centre and take little cuts just to face it off. And I'm using the heel of my hand here as a depth, as an anchor almost, to keep the tool the same distance into the wood as I make each cut. And try and make each pass as fluid as possible without stopping. And you should have nice shavings like that coming off. And with the bottom faced off, we now need to make a mark where we want our recess to be. Now your chuck may well have a different optimum measurement for your recess, but I know that my chuck, the Patriot chuck with the standard 2-inch jaws, needs ideally about 60 millimeters for its recess. So I'm going to put a little mark there at 30, because 30 times 2 is 60, so 30 is quite good. And then just leave a rough mark there. A millimetre or two either way really doesn't matter. And then I can move the tool rest back a bit, lower it down, and then take the diamond tip parting tool and start to make the recess. So you need to make an internal dovetail. So put the tool and point it towards the outside of the piece to create an inward dovetail, like so. Also, you need to check the depth, the optimum depth of your jaws for a recess as well. And then you can move the tool rest back in and pull it up to just below centre, and then very carefully you can take the skew chisel to flatten off the bottom rather make the internal angle nice and clean for the jaws to expand into. And with the recess of the piece done, we can now turn our attention to shaping the bowl that we want to make. So turn the tool rest roughly 45 degrees to the piece, because what we want to do first is remove the bulk of the wood from this corner so we can start shaping the piece. Now the first step here is not to really start shaping, but just to lose as much of the wood from that corner as we need to. Again, if you look, the handle is quite low down with the bowl gouge. And the shavings that are coming off are nice and long. And now we've taken most of the bulk off there, and the bowl's quite small, we can move the tool rest in a touch. So we can start making a nice curve. On this bowl I'm not going to put much of a foot, if at all, because I want as shallow a curve as possible from the recess out to the rim. I'm going to move the tool rest round a little bit more and in a bit closer, so I can continue this curve that I'm making up to the top. And if you watch, I'm actually moving my body as well with the gouge, so it's not just moving the gouge by itself, I'm moving my body with the gouge to become sort of part of the tool, as it were, and dragging it round, cutting nicely as I go to create the curve that I want. Now you may find when moving around your lathe you get blocked by the headstock, so you can turn yourself around and make a cut in the opposite direction. And you can turn the tool rest round a bit to follow the curve. I need a little bit more off here, as you may be able to see that the curve is nice, and then it bubbles out a little bit and then turns up, so I'm not quite happy with that, so I want to shallow this part of the curve off. That's better. I'm quite happy with that, but I want it off a little bit more on the bottom here. And then I'll follow the curve round again. If you're going to move the tool rest when the piece is spinning, that's up to you. You should really stop the lathe and then move the tool rest. And then as a nice finishing cut, you can turn the flute round so it's virtually closed onto the piece and just take very light cuts just to take out any tear out. And as you can see now, as I'm making these cuts, the tool is virtually horizontal. There, I'm happy with that. That's now good enough to finish. When it comes to finishing a bowl, I use a bowl sander like this one. This is the Deluxe Bowl Sander from Axminster Tools and Machinery. There are others you can get with longer wooden handles, but I find that this one suits me down to the ground. The finish off the tool here is really quite nice, so I'm going to start finishing at 120 grit. And I've got the extractor running as well, and ideally when you finish you should be wearing a respirator or something like that, but for this demonstration purpose I'm not going to, so I can talk about what I'm doing as I'm doing it. So when you finish a piece and you've got the bowl sander close to the work, you need to be sanding on this part of the pad and put it just below centre, and let the momentum of the piece turning take the head round. And you should sand at a slower speed than you cut at. Hold the sander firmly just below centre and run it backwards and forwards around the piece. Keep the head moving all the time so there isn't too much build-up of heat in the piece and also in the pad as well. Now when you're sanding the bottom of the piece around the recess, you want to be sanding so the bottom of the piece dips in towards the recess slightly, or rather dips in towards the centre. So that's when the bowl sits, you don't have a completely flat bottom. There's like a tiny little rim around the outside. And as this bowl doesn't have a foot, you can roll that little indent back round to start forming the shape of the outside of the piece. And also you can do the inside of the recess as well. I like to hold the pad still and just roll it round inside, and then work your way down the grits over the whole piece. And I will normally sand down to 400 grit, so that is what I will do next. I'll sand it down to 400 and then we can look at how we finish a piece. There's the piece now sanded down to 400 grit. Now when you're finishing, you need to make sure that there are no tool marks left in the piece, and also no radial marks left from the sander. There are no tool marks left on the piece, and there are no radial marks from the sanding either. So next what we're going to do is we're going to take some oil. Now I apply oil first and then sealer, and I use Danish oil virtually exclusively on pieces, and as you can see, the oil really brings up the shine and the chatoyance of the piece, and the oil is going to sink quite deeply into the wood, so we'll do a couple of coats of the Danish oil. Then we can take some clean kitchen towel, spin the lathe up, get a little bit of heat into it just to encourage the Danish oil or the oil that you're using to dry off. You can then apply some sealer. I'm going to use a cellulose sealer and thinners mix, about 80% cellulose to about 20% thinner, and apply that all over the piece. Give that a few seconds to dry off. It's quite warm in the workshop today, so it's going to dry quite quickly. And then you can either take 0000 wire wool or a Nye-Web pad like that. Spin the lathe and just rub it back very lightly. All you want to do is just take the top off so you get white powder on the top of the pad. And then just dust it down a little bit. And then you can apply your preferred wax if you want to, or you could just keep on sort of adding oil or whatever before the sealer. And I'm going to use Hampshire Sheen Original for this piece, as I don't want a high gloss finish. And generally waxes can go on with the lathe running at about half speed, something like that. And you don't need very much wax, or certainly you don't need very much Hampshire Sheen, and just wipe it on and then leave it to dry. And then when it's dry, you can use the same piece of kitchen towel and just buff it up to a nice luster. Burnish it in, and there we have a really nice luster to the outside of the piece. Give it a few minutes to cool down and make sure that it has set hard, and then you can reverse the piece in the chuck. And when you've got the piece off the worm screw, make sure that the outside of your chuck jaws are nice and clean and the inside of the recess is clean as well. Place it over the jaws and then carefully expand them into the recess, making sure that it's sitting flush and spinning nice and true. You don't want to tighten them up too much, because remember, the expansion is going to want to force the wood apart, so you don't need them terribly tight, but obviously tight enough that the piece doesn't come flying off the lathe. Then we can bring up the tool rest and then we will face the piece off just like we did on the other side. You can bring the tailstock up if you want to. I prefer not to, it's your choice. So taking the bowl gouge, handle down again, lower the tool rest a tiny bit, face off just like we did before. It doesn't matter if it becomes flat after 1 pass or 10 passes. Take light cuts until you're comfortable. There, I've got a nice crisp rim there now, so I can work on the walls or the inside of the piece. Now if this is going to be your first bowl, I wouldn't suggest making your walls ultra thin. And on this piece we'll make the walls about that thin, which is roughly 10 millimeters or I don't know, what's that? 1, 2, 3, hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7/16. I don't know. About 10 millimeters anyway. So the walls aren't horrifically thin, but they're not terribly thick that the piece looks too chunky. Make sure you move your tailstock out the way. Take your live centre out as well, because for this bit we're going to be leaning over the lathe like this, and the last thing you want to do is impale your elbow with the live centre, because trust me, it really hurts. So next what we're going to do is we're going to start hollowing out the bowl. If you take a look at the flute here, the flute is almost closed. So we'll start at that kind of angle. I'm not sure what sort of angle that is, but it's probably about 30 degrees from vertical. So start the lathe. Handle down a little bit. Flute open at about 30 degrees. And enter the wood, not at 90 degrees, but past 90 degrees over here. And carefully pull the tool towards you. I'm going to bring the tool rest up a little bit. It should be just below centre. And then practice that again. Keeping bevel contact throughout the entire cut if possible. Like that. Now if you can, if the head of the lathe can turn, then that will be of benefit to you, because you can keep the tool closer to your body. If not, you've got to be very careful with the balance of the tool. So we'll just continue making cuts. Getting a little, if you get some chatter like that, ease off the cut and don't take off so much. And as you're going into the bowl, try and follow the same sort of curve on the inside as you created on the outside of the piece. made a few cuts, you can start to feel how thick the walls are, and you can do that quite easily just by using your fingers, but you can use a caliper if you want to. I personally prefer to feel the thickness of the walls with my fingers wherever possible, and I can feel that up here is nice, but it begins to get a little bit thicker at the bottom, which is to be expected. So a few more cuts from about here down towards the bottom will even the thickness of those walls up. And that is quite nice. I'm really quite pleased with that. Now we've got an absolutely flat rim there, so we're going to add just a little accent to it and just angle the rim into the bowl a touch. So with the flute very closed, we can just scrape that very gently, out like that. And that's a very nice little bowl, especially if it's your first one. Now we need to sand it again. Sand towards the bottom corner opposite you, and keep the tool moving, otherwise you'll end up with a dip down here and a raised middle. So let's slow the lathe down. I'm going to turn the I've got the extractor on as well. Slow the lathe down, and when you're sanding the inside of a bowl, use the top quarter. On the outside of the bowl you use the bottom quarter, on the inside of the bowl use the top quarter, and keep it moving. Now we can take the oil again. Bit of oil and rub it round. The inside of the piece nicely, making sure you rub it in good and proper so it sinks into the grain. Speed the lathe up, get some heat into the oil in the piece just to help it dry off. And then you can grab the sanding sealer, leave that for a couple of minutes to dry off. Now the sanding sealer's gone off and I've rubbed it back with the Nye-Webb pad, and now I'm going to add a little bit of Hampshire Sheen Original to the inside. Stop the lathe, leave it for a couple of minutes to dry off, and then we can buff it up. And here we are. Here is hopefully your very first finished bowl. It's got a nice curve to the outside and a lovely dip on the inside as well, and the walls aren't horrifically thin, but they're also not too chunkily thick. It's a very nice piece for a first bowl. So thank you very much indeed for watching. I hope you've been inspired to have a go at turning your first bowl if you are a beginner wood turner, and please do let me know how you get on. Drop me an email via the website and let me know how you've got on, and you can also contact me via my Facebook page too. So thank you very much indeed for watching. If you would like to see more videos about this, about beginners projects, then please do subscribe. I aim to produce at least one beginners series project every single week, normally Wednesday, and at the moment it's looking like Thursdays too. So thank you very much indeed for watching. Please do like, share and subscribe, and if you wish then please do leave a comment and I'll get back to you. Thanks, bye for now.